Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted that you have come to listen to today's presentation, which is going to focus on how you can sidestep coding and you can ensure that you de-risk your EPR rollout with no code automation. And this evening's presentation is being given to us by Chris Bailey from LeapWork. Now, Chris is the UK Director of LeapWork, and Stevie Flanagan, who is the engineer who works with Chris. And I'm going to hand over to them to give their presentation and show you how it works in real time. And we will have questions at the end. And I'm delighted they've come to tell us about how they've been able to help NHS centres to do things more easily. Chris, over to you.
Thank you very much, Angus. Yeah, it's good to be here. And I should say that as a starting point, my team and I have really loved being part of this UKDHC initiative, right? And I think the support and the work that yourself, Angus, and David and the team are doing is really amazing. So thanks for what you've created here, and thanks for letting us be a part of it. It's been a really interesting journey over the last kind of 12 months or so to kind of see what's being created here. And I think my ambition today is to share what I hope is some really useful food for thought today about a way to drive more modernization within trusts using some exciting technology and approaches. So yeah, my name's Chris Bailey. I was part of the founding team in the UK for a company called LeapWork, and have been leading what is becoming now a very widespread automation project across many NHS trusts. And I'm pretty much in a different county every week now, delivering automation workshops to a large range of trusts in a variety of sizes, which is of course delivering huge success and value, both in standard BAU, but also increasingly, as you'll know from the title here, around EPR rollouts. But much more about that throughout the session this evening. I'm going to start with a quick overview of the challenge that we're seeing facing trusts up and down the country, and then I'll hand over to Stevie Flanagan here, who is our automation expert working on clinical applications across the country, and she's going to show in some detail after I've spoken here some live examples of automation in action and how your peers across the NHS are able to leverage that kind of value today. So let's start with this, and please forgive my AI picture generation skills, but hopefully it gives a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about today. So I'm sure many listening today are probably predominantly focused on your biggest IT initiatives. Maybe it is an EPR rollout, but maybe it's other big digital transformation projects. Maybe you're launching a new site or looking to streamline some of your tech stack. And all that is new and exciting and should quite rightly be taking center stage in your strategic thinking and your planning. And I'm sure you're bolstering your various pillars of that project and resources around the design phase and the implementation phase and also the go live itself. But really what we're here today to talk about is a pillar which needs addressing, I strongly believe, for every single trust across the country. Something which might seem smaller and important in the context of the broader project, and it's something that's quite easy to under-focus on, but certainly something that, if not factored right at the center of the whole program, can really take the whole game down. And that is, as you I'm sure can see, this concept of testing and the practice of software quality. Can you really afford for your multi-million-pound EPR rollout to fail because of poor software quality? What is the impact if it does? What does it mean if software bugs have an impact on patient care? What is the true cost of downtime on critical patient systems on the hospital floor or in the community? We know, all of us, I'm sure, that digital demands are rising aggressively all of the time. And these potential risks of poor quality software halting your initiatives, or even in the worst case scenario, impacting patient care, are exactly what we at LeapWork are solving for trusts up and down the country using AI-powered automation that we're going to go through. So I want to tell you a bit about how your peers have solved this problem, and we're going to show you a quick example of how automation works in practice, and then looking forward to taking questions or meeting anyone on a one-to-one basis if interested. So let me address or dig into the nature of this problem for those who might not be aware. So, and I guess why I believe it should be pretty close to the top of most IT teams' lists within the NHS. So this problem was actually highlighted to me, gosh, around 3 years ago now, when I sat down with a CIO of a trust just outside of London. And he, like I'm sure many people listening here, had critical technology initiatives, but was very concerned that a byproduct of all these exciting new projects was that a huge volume of new software was going to enter the trust with no real plan on how to cope with that new demand, right? There are more than 100 critical clinical applications already in place, and that was growing all the time. They were overseeing a move from one EPR to another. He was juggling data inputs. The team was stuck maintaining existing PAS systems and ICE, as well as a whole host of downstream systems. And these all, of course, needed testing for business as usual work, but also around the ever increasing mandatory upgrade schedule that were coming from these software applications, right? Particularly with initiatives that are coming in now with organizations like Nerve Center with their SaaS updates, for instance, or Oracle Health's OCI project, which are all adding further testing requirements. But despite the kind of criticality of these patient systems to be working and updating regularly, the burden of delivering quality of these applications sat with a very small team. In this example, just two manual testers who were very experienced IT testers. They knew end-to-end patient journeys really well, but not coders. And in order to sort of for them to deal with the volume of requirements that were landing on their lap and the new systems and the ever-increasing update schedule, they deployed a model which is very common in trust testing, where they would test as much as they possibly could each day as a two, and then rely on end users from across the different application teams throughout the trust to perform UAT around bigger testing work or bigger projects. IT people, digital nurses, EPR project managers, admin teams, even in many cases, high band clinical staff who are needing to be pulled away from their patient work to perform manual testing. And that kind of combination of a really high level of requirements, but a small number of resources to do it leads to inevitable drops in quality, right? And unfortunately, the potential in the very worst case scenario for critical bugs to leak into clinical patient systems. And I've seen, unfortunately, many examples over the last few years of some pretty severe issues leaking into EPRs around updates, for instance, meaning that clinical staff are not able to enter observation notes around updates because their mobile app is not working. So we see clipboards flying around the hospital floor and ultimately impacting follow-up and patient care and observation. And if you take that setup, which maybe is very recognizable for some of you, it's certainly what we see on a daily basis. If you apply that setup, a small team with massive requirements into the world of EPR rollouts, you might see a world that looks a little bit like what you can see here, right? And as I say, we see this across the board. You might have a number of modules to roll out in a kind of waterfall approach here, starting with ED, then maybe inpatient clerking, observations, whatever it might be, before some testing windows, and then of course finally a go live, and then you're into BAU. You then in parallel are trying to maintain your existing systems, right? Maybe your older EPR or your existing PAS system, which adds another whole burden to the team. And as part of any kind of standard testing strategy that you might deploy in your rollout, maybe if we start with ED here, you build a load of stuff and then you want to make sure that everything that you've built in module one is working. So maybe in this example, there's 100 tests to complete before you move on. Now, this could be thousands in practice, and we see many hospitals dealing with thousands per module, but let's say 100 for this example. And that's fine. You could probably do that manually with some clinical staff or digital nurses, whatever. You then move into module two, and again, you need to conduct an additional 100 tests to make sure that the new stuff doesn't work. But this time, you've also got to go back and make sure that the new stuff you've built hasn't broken some of the previous things that have been created. And before you know it, when you get to modules 3, 5, 6, 10, the regression and manual build-up becomes totally out of control in many of these EPR rollouts when delivered manually. So given that challenge we discussed around the large requirements, small teams, and this EPR context, trusts are typically faced with two major options, right? Option one is we prioritize quality because we can't afford bugs to leak in the way that I've just described, but we don't have enough hours in the day. So in order to test everything we need to, we have to push our project go live date out by 3, 4, 5, 6 months, right? And this comes with a whole host of expenses, not to mention needing to pull in, of course, clinical staff and folks from across the trust to reach the required coverage. Or, of course, option two is the route that many trusts are forced to take, which is we must consider our go live date to be gospel. Therefore, we can't afford to move it. So we'll take a risk-based approach to testing and potentially go live, having only tested 20, 30% of what we could, and then we'll go live with a heap of bugs that leak into production. And of course, We've already discussed the potential implications of that, but from an EPR context, it can also mean spending 6 months troubleshooting, clinical staff really unhappy with systems, or even rolling back into previous versions. So how do we solve the problem, I suppose, is the question, right? This is something that we see across the board. And certainly in the case of that CIO that I mentioned earlier outside of London, well before we had the chance to sit down and talk about solutions, his team had already thought of an obvious solution to this problem, which was automation, right? Why don't we embed automation in the trust? It's a good idea. It's going to help us do more with less. We'll get the maximum out of that team of 2 who are currently drowning. We can increase coverage around the key updates and hopefully minimize any incidents leaking in the future. So it's a good idea, automation. I think we could all understand why automation is beneficial. But very quickly after beginning to explore trials and different approaches, his team were hit with a roadblock that virtually every trust we speak to across the country experiences. And that is that automation typically looks like this, right? It's very code heavy. It's very difficult to understand. In general, it requires individuals to have a pretty significant development background to build and even more so to maintain the automation when things change around updates. But this developer resource simply doesn't exist within most trusts, right? Because 9 out of 10 folks in trusts involved in testing are not developers, right? They're real experts in end-to-end patient journeys, great UAT testers, but not coders, not developers. And we all know how hard developers are to find, right? The ones you do maybe have in your trust, I'm sure you don't want to be deployed into testing functions. You want them building exciting new functionality for your patients. So I suppose in short, we have a problem that exists in trust today, right? Around a huge volume of requirements growing all the time, but a very limited pool to ensure that the quality is maintained in that application landscape. So the opportunity to potentially remove that critical barrier to entry that exists that you can see here to achieve successful automation without hiring coders in the team is in a nutshell why we exist and the work that we're doing across the trust. So you can see immediately the difference, right? LeapWork is the world's only true visual language automation platform. It's designed entirely for business users, manual testers across trusts who can build and maintain and scale their automation with no prior developer experience without writing one single line of code anywhere. And yeah, you can immediately, hopefully you can see the difference between this LeapWork automation flow, which we'll dig into in a second, versus the traditional automation you saw on the previous screen, right? Maybe this is the first time some of you are seeing a Leap workflow, but straight away you can see what's happening here, right? We're logging into an EPR in Nerve Center in this case. We're searching for a patient. We're entering IDs. We're entering some hospital IDs, doing some comparisons. Everyone can now, across the NHS, have conversations about automation regardless of background, right? And it's really about breaking down silos that might exist between those with the functional patient knowledge and those with coding knowledge. And we're seeing some really truly amazing results across the country of taking existing manual testing teams within all sorts of trusts who have no prior automation or coding experience and being able to scale quality across their trust without hiring any developers, without writing any code. And I'd be very happy to introduce anyone who's interested to some of those users. And LeapWork is the fastest growing test automation platform in the world with customers everywhere across the globe. Just last year, Microsoft have recommended LeapWork publicly as their automation approach of choice for all their customers. I'm very happy to talk about this kind of in more detail following the session today. But if we take that kind of visual approach to testing into the example we showed before, right? How does this visual approach to automation translate into a practical EPR scenario? Well, the ability to create reusable, shareable automation assets in the context of this rollout we just talked about means that the hundreds of test cases that are being added for each module is work that can be reused over and over again, replacing that large red regression buildup with reusable automated scripts to ensure coverage can be at 95% rather than 20%, both in rollout and also in BAU when updates come along, right? So that's really the practical way that we're seeing go lives happen on time and without issues. And maybe the final piece from me here, and maybe the exciting piece in the context of what I've spoken about today, is we're seeing a whole host of great stories coming out of NHS Trust across the country. One of the standout ones, and we could have chosen many, is from the team at Prince Alexandra Hospital, who have basically successfully done exactly what I was describing, right? They've empowered their existing team of manual testers to scale automation across their trust without writing a single line of code. And you can see that before LeapWork here, their team were very much in that position I described at the start, right? Small group, maintaining a large number of clinical applications and spending almost all of their time every day manually testing, only to reach around 20, 30% coverage. If you fast forward to today, 2.5, 3 years down the line, they've brought their release cycles for testing for core upgrades to their EPR down from a 2-week process, manual process, to an automated flow that runs in a click in less than 1 hour, which is exactly around that regression buildup I talked about earlier. It's an 80 times faster result than they were doing previously. They've also, you can see that second point there, they've got more than 100 automated checks that run every single morning across their full landscape to ensure that quality is maintained on their key systems. And they're alerted in the early hours each morning if there are any issues that have occurred that needs addressing. And the final third point there, you can see this is not just an EPR process, right? It sits across PAS and data processes, downstream systems, and you can see a wide range of applications there. And as Steve is going to show in a second, the automation with LeapWork we're talking about today is completely agnostic to technology. So whether it's your EPR, your mobile app, your desktop app, things like BadgerNet or Doctor, anything that needs rigorous QA can benefit from automation. And you can see the quote there from Liz Barber, the test manager, who's really driven so much of this automation within PAH. They were even recognized last year for a health tech award on the back of their transformation through automation. And I suppose maybe the very final point I'll make here, just to maybe bring this back to you all listening on the call or on the podcast, I think if I was in your shoes, I'd probably be thinking, okay, well, look, I'd love to scale automation effectively across my trust. All the obvious benefits of automation are great. And even better, it would be great if I could do that with my existing team with a variety of skill set and I don't have to rely on coders or hire developers. But I suppose the challenge here is what the step one with automation is always the hardest, right? Because the team need time to build up the flows, and we have to invest upfront to be able to have the automation running. And that's certainly true, right? There's always a hockey stick curve when it comes to automation. You've got to build it up front, but then the robot will run forever and the value sort of becomes exponential moving forward. So really what myself and the other folks using LeapWork in Trust, like Liz and many others, what we're really trying to do here is to create a community around automation within the NHS. So everyone can really benefit from each other's work. So Prince Alexandra and the many other LeapWork trusts have made their hundreds of pre-existing automation flows available to any trust to download and implement. And we've seen some really great examples recently of folks coming on board and taking advantage of pre-built existing automation that exists on the EPR, on things like BadgerNet, like I mentioned, and can immediately jump up their coverage 4-5x within a matter of weeks by using pre-built library of flows for the apps that they share in common. And this library is growing all the time. The community around automation is growing all the time. And really what we're trying to do here is constantly bring down the barrier to entry for automation, which has existed in the NHS for a long time. And really, in a nutshell, that's what LeapWork's mission is all about, bringing down that barrier to entry in every way that we possibly can across the NHS. So with that, I suppose it all sounds good on paper, right? But what we really want to do is try and show you in practice how this could work for you. And maybe this is a good opportunity as well for you all to think about your own processes that could be really great candidates for automation. And as I said, very happy to run one-to-one automation workshops with anyone who's interested to explore these solutions. But with that, I want to hand you all over to Stevie Flanagan, who you've not had a chance to hear from yet. So good evening, Stevie. Please take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Good evening, everyone. Yes, that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring it to life. Chris told us how automation can de-risk these digital transformations, these EPR rollouts, but how can we empower all various skill sets, especially any sort of clinical technicians, midwives, to be able to capture what the applications that they know in and out, BadgerNet, Nerve Center, Oracle Health, and transform that into automation so that we don't need to be taking them off the floor and from their jobs. So what I'm going to highlight today is really that power of a visual language, how we can give an AI-powered recorder to these SMEs and these domain knowledge individuals, translate that into automation, and ultimately, how can we have automation give us greater coverage, either by data driving it or handling both positive and negative testing within the same scope. So welcome to LeapWork. What we're looking at right now is our LeapWork studio. The studio is where we're going to go and create and draw out and visualize what our automation is going to look like. You're going to see I placed some building blocks on to my canvas right now. A building block represents an automated action. And if you want to think about them as Lego pieces, no one Lego piece is that impressive on its own, but it's how you stitch them together that you can have racetracks and full working cities. And that's how we're going to start today, too. We're going to uniquely put our building blocks in and gain greater coverage. Now, beyond the studio, there's two other components to LeapWork. There's the LeapWork controller, and if we think of that as our centralized repository, or even better yet, our brain of the system, connecting to that controller is going to allow Angus and myself and Chris to collaborate and benefit off of each other's work. And there's a third component which I'm going to introduce very shortly, and that's the LeapWork agent. Essentially, the agent is the robot that we're going to take by the hand and train it to perform the automation for us. Now, if you're anything like me, your eyes are probably darting all over the page here. So this area that I'm scrolling in and scrolling out of, this is our canvas where we're going to draw our automation. This area that I'm expanding, this is an area to organize yourself according to projects, to sprints, to applications, technologies. I have it organized for my demonstration needs, so I have it organized by various technologies or frameworks or different use cases. And in the far left-hand side, this gray column, this is our main menu. And what we're looking at right now is what we call our flows. And in LeapWork, the flow is that automation sequence, the order of the automation. This could represent a small step in a larger test suite, or this could represent an entire end-to-end process. As Chris has mentioned, we are absolutely tech agnostic. So what we want to really follow is that user experience, is that the data process, admitting a patient, following it through beds, and then discharging hits many different modules within an EPR. So let's build together. What would it look like if you started with absolutely nothing today and you installed LeapWork and you just wanted to begin empowering the individuals that know these systems in and out and exactly how they should be performing? Well, I placed a building block here, and I think even in your very quick introduction, you have an understanding of what this automation is. And if I go ahead and run this, it's going to start the web browser. And that's exactly what I have done ahead of this call. Now, we could draw out our green arrow to indicate what we want to do next. And LeapWork out of the box has over 300 different types of automated actions that you could utilize, whether that was incorporating data for data from a database to test different IDs or codes, maybe dependent on a HTTP request or an API to validate an integration. We mentioned that we're tech agnostic. We have automation possible for all sorts of actions for desktop applications, for web-based applications. But what I don't expect you to do is have any of this memorized, because there is a search box here, and you could just start typing the actions that you would like to perform, and you can see that LeapWork is going to filter out those results. But there's one step better. Why would I piece together those actions when I could actually just record end user interacting with that application? And that's exactly where we're going to start today. Now you'll see that my cursor is acting a bit funny, and it's picking up on different elements of the website or the application. In this instance, I never told LeapWork, go to a single page application or go to a .NET framework or go to a JavaScript application. So in this sense, we're tech agnostic. All I need to do is, maybe in this example, I would accept some cookies. And when I click accept cookies, our machine learning empowered recorder is popping up and saying, hey, there's quite a few things I can do here, but I'm going to suggest that more than likely what you want to do is click this. But our agent's fully aware that maybe I want to get that web text and actually validate that it says accept. But 9 times out of 10, the actions we want to automate are going to be within the first top positions. And I'm going to say, go ahead and click that. The agent says, hey, I can click my button in all different types of ways. I'm just going to keep it that classic left and click apply. Now, what happens next is the agent itself is going to perform that automation. And this is quite critical if anyone else has automation experience, because I'm getting a real-time validation of, am I training the agent correctly? I'm just going to do a few different clicks here. I'm navigating, and truth be told, the recorder is not the exciting part. The recorder is how we can lower that entry bar and get the right individuals involved for creating the coverage that we need for their critical applications. But ultimately, it's clicks, it's inputs. The real power is going to happen when we're jumped back into the studio, where we're going to provide validation to confirm that the system is performing as expected. Also, my recording is just a single recording. So whatever I type here, we're only going to be able to have that recording for this particular postcode. In this example, I'm just going to put in NW6, click apply, and then I'm going to press the search button. When I do that, the system is actually going to tell me, hey, that's not a full postcode. That's not going to help with returning you the results to finding who your closest GP is in this example. What this test may be doing is one of two things. I could be validating that the algorithm that's used to find my closest GP by proximity is working, and that's aligning to maybe a data source like a database or an Excel sheet and confirming that that is accurate based off of open GP surgeries. But equally, why not validate that I'm actually getting a return message as well, validating that there is an error message, that the system itself is working as expected. So what I'm going to do here, instead of any sort of clicks or inputs, I'm going to grab some web text, because what I will want to do when I'm back in the studio is I'm going to say, hey, read me this error and tell me, is it what it's expected? But because I know exactly that I kind of did this recording wrong, there's something I can do quite easily. And again, this is different than some other recorders, is I can pause the recording. I can actually go back and say that I want to type in some new information. And maybe I do just go ahead and do that NW62PX and press search. Because if I can inputted a complete postcode, what I would expect in return is for the results to be there. But what I'm doing with this single recording is I'm testing positively as well as testing negatively. And all of a sudden, if I can get greater coverage, because more often than not, and Chris and I hear it quite often when we're doing value assessment cases for the NHS, is that resource is a bottleneck. We're testing the happy path, and perhaps we're only focusing on the most critical of paths as well, which is quite understandable. So in this example, I'm just going to go ahead and grab that returned result for the named surgery. And again, I'm just going to get that web text. By the way, we can slice and dice the text that we grab. If it's a whole paragraph, we could pull out keywords, numerical values, starts with, contains with. We can do it all. But in this example, I'm just going to grab that full title. When I hovered over that red flashing light that lets me know that I'm recording, you saw that I paused the recording so that I could set up the screen a bit differently, but equally, I could maybe be pulled to some more important task. I can pause this recording if I'm involved with manual testing, go to my priority, which is perhaps my activities on the floor, and I could come back to this later, and LeapWork would be able to stitch together the automation seamlessly. There's no impact as to the amount of time that it's been paused. Equally, I could go on a lunch break, make a brew, whatever I wish. But what I also want to highlight here is this plus sign, because right now I'm just on the nhs.uk, but imagine I need it to validate, maybe I inputted some information and I need it to go into Lorenzo to confirm that the data was now present in there. So I can start recording end-to-end processes as well, which is quite powerful. But I'm going to say I'm happy with this basic recording because it's a bit of an introduction. And I want to see what the agent's been doing for me in the background. Well, the agent has been translating my actions. Let me just collapse that there. My agent has been translating my actions into those building blocks, into those Lego pieces. Now, what we'll see here is that there's some visual context clues as to how I was interacting with the application. But if you do have automation experience, you may know that there are different ways of automating. And what I want to highlight right here is in this particular example, we were not automating according to the position on the screen, the color of the pixels, or the text, but something greater. And if you are curious, we can open up the bonnet to the car and dig a bit deeper. But the reason that these images are here are so that we can collaborate. We're going to have all different skill sets. There might be an external partner, there might be a QA team, there's the midwife themselves, and we want to be able to communicate. So this is really bringing to life that visual language. I can take it one step further. I can rename these building blocks so that they align with maybe any sort of documented test cases. So I can say accept cookies. I can say nav to services. But this is multifaceted because this is also going to help us when the automation fails. Am I going to be able to debug and understand why it failed? Well, that's quite important because we want to reduce the amount of time of remediation as well. But two, do I have an understanding of the impact it may have had on the trust? Was there something critical such as admitting a patient that wasn't able to achieve, and what type of blast radius may that have? I could keep on renaming this, but I think you get the point. I'll put in a couple of them as I go. Now, if I scroll out here, remember I did it, I almost created 2 test cases with my single recording because I made a mistype by not searching a complete postcode. Well, there's a couple of things that I can do here is I'm going to say click search, and this get web text here, that was the message that said that there was a problem. So I can call this error message, question mark. Now, if I got that error message, and I'm just going to create some space for me here, if I got that error message, maybe I'd want to validate what that message said. Is it the message I would expect? Is it a completely different error code that I wasn't to know about? Because actually, if it's what I expected, maybe this automation is still a success and there's a different investigation to have. So with this error message here, what I'm going to do is bring in one of our logic building blocks. And this is where the importance of those domain experts really come in, because it's not about the clicks, it's not about the inputs, it's about, is this system working correctly? And in this example, I want to take my error message, and if you see down here, it says there was text found, and there's a blue toggle here. This blue toggle represents something different than what we've been doing. The green arrows have been representing order and sequence of events, but blue is data. And data is something that we can play with, and data is something that we can send anywhere. So I can send that text to my compare block and perform an operation on it. And in this example, I want to say if it says problem. Now, if I'm comparing 2 things, I need to compare apples to apples, right? And so we have all different types of comparison types. Maybe, especially in the case of an EPR, maybe I need to compare timestamps to timestamps. Has it been within an hour since someone was seen, or do I need to mail out something because it's been 14 days? All of a sudden, this timestamp helps us with validation. Maybe there's date or time as well. But in this example, I just want to compare text. And I don't need it to be equal, but I'm just looking for that word problem. And if that word problem comes up, I know that the system is returning the message as expected. So maybe just to confirm, I might want to include some additional information, such as I can take a screenshot of the application just to confirm and collect additional evidence so that I don't have to recreate this issue. And you know what? I wouldn't call this a failure because the system was responding as it was intended. So I'm actually going to say that this is a done. This isn't a pass because it's not really what I wanted, but actually it's not a failure either. And I might say something like negative test pass, possible test data management error. And then all of a sudden I'm feeding more information for when we run this test. And you know what? I can go one step further. I can say the postcode that I used to search. So I'm going to add the information in regards to what was the postcode that was searched for this automation. And I can do that by creating what we call in LeapWork a token, but you can think of this as an environment variable. And with that message, I can actually send that information back from type postcode. Again, I have my blue connector, and I can take that value and send it all the way down to my done message. So now this is a dynamic message that's going to be created depending on the postcode that was used. Now, I want to take this a couple steps further because we don't know what a positive test looks like. What if I did input an entire postcode and that it was returning as expected? Well, then, quite simply, this error message, if it was not found, I could do something else. And if it was not found, I can go ahead and go and validate that web text, the return results Is this being returned as expected? And maybe I want to provide another compare block, and I want to make sure that the GP surgery that's being returned is the one that I would expect it to. So maybe there's a database, maybe there's an API, there's some other data set that I can incorporate to help me validate, is our search feature working as expected? I'm just going to go ahead and hard code it right now, but I guess you can expect what I'm going to say. We're not finished yet because we're going to constantly improve this. And then if that did compare and that was what was expected, I can then call this a pass. So what we just did is we took a single recording, just so when using the system as they know best. Maybe they were incorporated for a manual test, but we can record that. And then all of a sudden, when we talk about Nerve Center moving from on-prem to SaaS, and all of a sudden those updates are moving from the trust will to mandatory fortnightly updates, well, I'm not going to be able to pull off the clinical individuals that I need to test. All of a sudden, my window of 2 weeks every 4 quarterly is going to become smaller and smaller. So that either means I'm getting less coverage, or well, I guess that's all that it means. It means that you're having the systems accepting great risk. But what about, I need to do this for 100 test cases. I need to do this for maybe 1,000 test cases, right? Well, with Leapwork, one of our differentiators is that we can start identifying reusable components that are going to allow you to build at greater speed, as well as help support, reduce any sort of maintenance time. So, for example, if I have a look at this, everything from navigating services to finding a GP and typing in the postcode and clicking search, those steps, those 5 steps, are always going to be used when I'm searching for a GP. If I highlight those and say, hey, this is going to be find GP, these steps are always what it's going to be. Now, all of a sudden, I have reduced those 5 building blocks to 1 building block, and sure, that looks a bit tidier, but what we've actually done is we have now added that building block to our toolkit. And so the next person that needs to go and build a test case that involves searching for a GP, that building block is already created. What that also means is if there is a process change, a requirement, or what's more than likely, maybe actually just a software update and something changed and it affected the way, in this example, we searched for a GP, I would have one location to go in and make any sort of amendment. Let's say very quickly that we no longer needed to press the search button and it was just automatic, and that was the latest, greatest feature of this application I was using. I don't need to re-record it. I can just highlight that building block, press delete, redraw my sequence arrows, and everywhere I would be using this reusable customized component would be updated to reflect that. So even though that update took less than a minute, if I was using this in 100 of my test cases, that's still 100 critical minutes that are taken away from manual testers that are not actually manual testers. I am going to just place that building block back there for you because I do want to run this in just a moment's time. I'm just going to delete that spare building block. And you know what, there's one more thing. Sometimes the cookies may be there, sometimes the cookies may not be there. So that's another example. I could just add a not found building block and say it's not going to be make or break if the cookies acceptance is there or not. So let's see here. What have we done? We started with the recorder. We started to diverge and handle different deviating behaviors. We added different criteria to the test case. We added validation to confirm the system was working as expected. But there's one more thing we can do. We can bring in some data, because right now this is going to run for specifically, let me go look, that's going to run for NW6. And what I actually want to do is maybe I might have a list of hundreds, if not greater thousands of postcodes that I want to test to make sure that this is working correctly. So instead of having that hard coded, I'm going to remove that. I'm going to actually bring in another building block, which is called value input. But I think this looks fairly familiar because if you look at us sending the postcode out, I can also, this is us looking for data. And when I find that data, which I have named postcode, I want to be able to send it here. I'm going to click save. And when we go back over to our main flow now, we'll see that we're actually looking for an input. So I could put something else here and type again and hard code it and run it over and over again. Sure, that's going to save me time. But now I could actually bring in a data set. In my example, I'm going to bring in a read Excel file. This Excel could be on a shared network. The data could be maintained by another team entirely, allowing you to test with the greatest and most accurate data. But in my example, I'm going to import a file. I'm going to bring in my data sheet, which I use for absolutely everything. So I need to go in and define where exactly is the data that I want to use. You might see at the bottom here, I have all different tabs. Not all of it is important to this test, but actually I'm just going to go to NHS. I'm going to highlight the 2 columns that I want to use. I'm going to say that that first row is a header because it's going to name the data that I get to play with. And now what I can do is I can take that postcode data and send it to the postcode slot in my reusable component. And then I can validate it and dynamically drive my comparison block as well. Now, I don't want to just do that once perhaps, but I could iterate through an entire list. So now all of a sudden a single recording has brought me coverage of, not in my example because I just had a few lines, but hundreds and thousands of postcodes. But what is this going to look like? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this and I'm going to run this and we're going to speak about evidence and evaluation and perhaps the type of information for audits as well. Now, I've been talking a lot. I do want to pause while this is running and see if there are any questions, if anyone would like to unmute or ask Chris and myself any questions.
I think if Stevie, you have to be very dependent on your postcodes and your GPs being accurate. Fundamentally, if you're dealing with inaccurate data, you have problems.
Yeah, exactly.
How do you address that?
Yeah, fantastic. So I realized that actually my validation did not work correctly, and I would look to improve that. But you're spot on, Angus. You know, one of the biggest hurdles we see is around test data management itself. So if there is a data set that needs to be maintained, one way that we are dealing with that with LeapWork is bringing in AI to help us generate data. So again, removing the need of the maintenance of the data, specifically for test purposes, and of course in lower environments where we don't want to have any sort of PPI. And so that relieves us of having to maintain information, removes us from needing to understand anything like regex or SQL databases, so on and so forth. And it helps us drive meaningful test data, but nothing that we need to maintain.
Thank you very much, Stevie. If there are any questions, can you put your hand up, please? And I will hand over to you. I have to confess, Stevie, I am absolutely exhausted. I have been concentrating on your presentation. I understand most of it, not all of it. Concentrating on what you've been saying has been hard work. And it's very difficult for people to take this in over a short period.
Mm. And I guess we can think of this as a bit of a teaser. It may be a few of the individuals' first time exposed to test automation. The good news is that it's a staged approach, and ultimately what we're looking to do is return a lot of time back to the business. Recently, Chris and I worked alongside a new trust that's taken on board LeapWork to help with their digital transformation to a SaaS-based EPR. And when speaking to them, their team of 2 spent the equivalent of 1.9 full-time employee hours testing 3 modules in Nerve Center. And that was when it was an on-prem solution. So this is a really big challenge that needs addressing to confirm that everything is working and integrated as expected.
Perhaps I'm a simple guy, but if Nerve Center is installing a system, is it not their responsibility to make sure it works, not yours?
Good question. There is not a trust that we have met that has delivered a boiler template of Nerve Center. There are customizations aplenty for the needs of the services, the regions, the integrations that they may have, because we're only speaking about one technology when we speak about Nerve Center, but maybe they have a different backend or a different maternity ward application or a different optometry, whatever it may be. It gets connected and bolted together quite differently, even if maybe the core application looks a bit similar.
And has open air made any difference to what you're doing, or are you doing things that aren't dependent on open air? Open EHR.
Now, I haven't come across open air charts. Chris,
Oh,
have you?
sorry. Open air is an attempt to standardize the software across different organizations so that when you are installing a new app into something like Nerve Center or any of the others, then it installs more easily. I think Chris might be able to answer that better.
Yeah, this is a really important point for us. I think I mentioned earlier about the kind of the value of reusable automation across trust, right? And if you look at the screen now, this is what Stevie's showing you. So I think one of the real ways that this scales for everyone to benefit from each other is by building the sort of leap workflows that you've seen on the screen from Stevie today for apps in common, patient journeys in common across many applications. So initiatives like OpenAir, which are almost encouraging trust to be standardized, is great news for automation, because it means that Trust A doesn't build 100 flows that are then not reusable in Trust B, who have an entirely different technology stack. And if you look at the left-hand side of the screen here, you can see just a snapshot of the vast library of existing flows that exists, in this case, for ED admissions in Nerve Center, for Lorenzo, for OpenEyes, for Oracle Health, and many other downstream systems, typical end-to-end patient journeys that many trusts would have in their system and need to implement. So the more standardization of base systems equals the better that sharing and reusability and automation can happen for trusts. And we have, as I say, many hundreds of these flows that exist, which is growing all the time. And that's part of that community that I mentioned. So we're all for initiatives like that, because it means that people aren't reusing work and having to start from scratch every time. We can all get together and share our work as a collective.
Lovely. Any questions from the audience? Anybody wants to?
No, I've got a comment, if I may. I mean,
This is Roger. Roger runs his own firm and has just changed firms, but he's a bit of an entrepreneur.
Great.
My background between 1978 and 2000 was implementing electronic health records across the UK and most of Europe. And the original intent was to take a US product and implement it. Now I'm going back when software was architected differently, and we couldn't do it. To give you some impression, we took it first into the Netherlands, and it needed 70% code change. If we'd have tried to take the Netherlands model or even the original US model into the UK, we'd have had to do the same. And we said, this is impossible. You cannot build a business in this way. So we decided that we would take the design concepts in the US model, but rebuild it on a new architecture designed for Europe, so that we could minimize the amount of change, so that it didn't require code change. And we did a lot of work to try and produce world model. Okay. And we kind of failed. And the reason we failed is we couldn't control the customers. Every customer wanted something different. So we ended up having country models. So we made sure that every implementation in the UK that we did was to a standard. Otherwise, we couldn't have maintained it. And I think, Nerve Center has done brilliantly well in recent years. But honestly, I'll tell you a story, if I may. and that is that I got involved in iSoft for 2 years. And the first board meeting I attended, when there was each director was giving their update, I read the document, and each customer had a different code. And I asked innocently, is that code allied to the client in some way? Does it mean something? Oh, no, it's just a different version of the product.
Yeah.
You can't build, a business without controlling the standards. So I applaud what I saw. I'm sorry I couldn't join you earlier because I'd love to have seen the whole thing. So I applaud what I saw.
You
But-
can see the whole thing. It comes out in a podcast in about 10 days' time.
That'll be
Okay.
good, because I will certainly watch it. But,
Chris,
and there's real need, because if there are EHR providers out there that are allowing clients to change everything, they're building a problem for themselves.
Chris,
It might be an
how do you
opportunity for
control
you.
your clients?
Say that again.
How do you control your clients?
Well,
Chris?
yeah, with great difficulty. No, look, you've explained a real problem that exists, right? And unfortunately, we talk about standardization, but in an ideal world, if we could have 30% standardization, that's a win, right? But the vast majority will be different customization, different strategies, people going in different directions. What I am seeing that's, I think, really powerful now from an automation perspective and an EPR perspective is groups of trust with similar geographies coming together for shared goals, right? And that really helps from this kind of people going in lots of different directions. Yes, unfortunately, folks in the East Midlands might be different to folks up in the north or whatever, but there are groups of trust now coming together with shared ideas and shared strategies, which hopefully can mitigate some of that, Roger. But you're right, and I think unfortunately the reality is we're never going to be able to solve that problem. So all we can do is try and help these trusts be able to adapt to the ever-changing technology landscape themselves, without hoping that there's a utopian world where everything is standard and everything is the same. We've got to try and empower trust to deal with the reality, which is really what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, it's one thing if they change it, but it's another thing if the software originator allows each implementation to be different, because that is a nightmare.
I'd like to wind up this podcast. I think we've had
Brilliant.
a lovely presentation. It has
It
been a
was,
bit complicated,
Yeah.
but it has given us an insight into how this problem of avoiding excessive coding or getting away from coding and using real world words makes such a difference to the efficiency with which we work. So I would like to thank both Chris and Stevie for their contribution to this session. And we look forward to working in a more agile way, to working more efficiently in future, and producing a better service for our patients as a result. So thank you very much indeed.